Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, not to be confused with the 18 other Ashlands in the country. And I'm really thrilled to be here with my friend Bridget Eileen Madden and Sonali Dev. I just love her. I think she's amazing. I'm looking forward to this conversation where we talk all things Austen-esque, where for her to celebrate her new book coming out, The Emma Project, or just came out. So we won't be talking spoilers. We're just going to be chatting about Jane Austen and the book and Sonali and how she came up with this amazing series. So before we get started, I just wanted to say really quickly, I'd like to thank a few people and organizations, the Friends of the Ashland Library, which support all of our adult programming. We have partnered with Mass Bay Community College for this program, as well as the Needham and Maynard libraries in Massachusetts, because when libraries get together, we're super awesome. um, During the talk, Bridget and Sonali will be having a conversation. You can put your questions in the Q&A and put any comments or tech issues you have in the chat. For now, like while I'm doing my little intro, feel free to let us know where you're coming from. So let me get started with Bridget. Bridget Eileen is a friend of mine. We used to work together at Mass Bay Community College Library. She has been working in libraries for over 20 years. She is the artistic director of a longstanding poetry festival. She's an amazing poet, the Boston Poetry Marathon, and she's the founder and organizer of the Boston Austen Book Club, which is the reason that I asked her to moderate this conversation, because she knows everything about Jane Austen and her books. So I was very lucky that all things came together and Bridget was willing to do this. So welcome, Bridget. Welcome, Sonali. Thank you so much for being here. And I just really look forward to this conversation.
Yes. Yay.
Thank
I'm so
you,
excited
Mina.
too. Hi, everybody. And now I get to introduce Sonali Dev. And so I'm just going to do the standard wonderful credentials here. USA Today best-selling author Sonali Dev writes Bollywood-style love stories that explore universal issues. Her novels have been named Best Books of the Year by Library Journal, NPR, The Washington Post, and Kirkus. She's won numerous accolades, including the American Library Association's Award for Best Romance, the RT Reviewer Choice Award for Best Contemporary Romance, multiple RT Seals of Excellence, has been a Rita finalist, and has been listed for the Dublin Literary Award. Shelf Awareness calls her not only one of the best, but one of the bravest romance novelists working today. And she lives in Chicagoland with her husband, 2 visiting adult children, and the world's most perfect dog. Welcome, Sonali.
Hi, Bridget. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone who's here. I have to, before we start, give a shout out to my best friend from India who is on the attendees. Hi, Rupali. I'm so glad you're here. And my brother-in-law who's visiting and sitting downstairs in our, in our living room, who's also on there. Hi, Subodh. All right.
Wonderful. Oh, that's awesome. And shout out to the Boston Austen Book Club members who I see are also in attendance. They helped me with my homework, if you will. We read and talked about Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors last month as part of my way to warm up for today. So we're going to start off with some general questions. We're going to get into, this is, by the way, Happy Asian and Pacific American Heritage Month. So we promoted this as an APAHM event because it just came in perfectly that way at Mass Bay. And so we're going to be talking about Jane Austen, modernizing her novels, the issues that come up, and the things that you get to address when you modernize her work. And also then we'll get into the deep dive of the parallels between the 2 stories. And I did my best. If anyone remembers Inside the Actors Studio, I did my best James Lipton with my note cards. So
Should I be nervous?
No, they're like quick questions, right? And I have a goatee, or actually like those Will Ferrell imitations of things were so funny because he'd have like a huge stack and ask questions. But anyway, I hopefully my questions aren't pretentious, they're just fun. So the big first obvious one, I think, is where did you get this idea to create the series?
Oh gosh, so I read Jane Austen really young. My first exposure to her actually was through a Hindi language Indian TV serials, as we call them, back in, I think it was 1884, sorry, 1984. I'm not that old, except to my children. So it was back in, I was in 6th grade or 7th grade, and this was a scene by scene, character by character retelling in Hindi/Urdu on television screen back in the time when there was not 7,000 streaming things, but a few hours of TV every evening. So it was a really big deal. I remember watching it. I remember being completely blown away by a female protagonist who was opinionated, who who did not pander to the aunties or to men to be liked, and she just spoke to something I believed deeply without it being reinforced by the world around me. And I was like, what is this? And of course, I ran out and I checked out Pride and Prejudice from my school library, and then, then Persuasion and Emma and Sense and Sensibility, and I was completely lost. So I believe that Jane Austen is to blame or responsible for the person I became. So she's very foundational in in how I see my life and see myself. And so it's not just an influence, a literary influence, but it is really an influence to who I am. So in my head, very young, I was already rewriting these in my family, in my culture, doing the whole translation thing, as we often do, daydreaming these stories in my world.
Right.
But I think once I started taking my writing seriously, then I always knew I was going to do something with these stories. But I also knew pretty soon that it was not going to be scene by scene, character by character translations into a different culture or into a different world. It was going to be something else. It was somehow going to be an homage. And then, so what these books really are, I really try to separate myself from the word retelling, and think of it more as an homage, not even so much as an homage to the stories, but as an homage to the lessons I learned as a person from those stories. Yeah. So that's kind of where this idea came from. And I promised Bridget I would keep my questions short so we could get through her stack.
It's a great answer.
I'll also say that it's been a lifelong dream, because in a lot of, I think, us, Jane Austen fans think of her world as being one. So, in my head, the Dashwoods were always friends with the Bennets, and, they kind of all hung out, and it was all one world. And so I did want to actually set these, my 4 favorite stories under one universe, one story umbrella. And so I always wanted to do this thing where I, brought this story under these 4 stories under one completely connected umbrella. And that umbrella, of course, is this politically ambitious Indian American family in the San Francisco Bay Area, where the oldest son is running for California governor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. And I love what you just said about like how her work didn't just influence you in a writerly way, but just in your life. I feel that too. I call Jane Austen my dead best friend I've never met, because I just feel like, when I turn to her a lot when I need some guidance in something or something like that.
Yeah, and it really is, I think we're born believing certain things, and then the world beats it out of us. And so you have this sense, and if we're lucky enough, then we're able to reclaim that sense as we grow. And she always reinforced whatever my sense about, either she created it or she reinforced it. It was something there.
Or it could be like a confluence of the two,
yeah,
right?
It's always more than just one thing. And yeah.
So what has been the most pleasant surprise in this endeavor?
Oh my gosh, first, can I just say, like, the satisfaction and the just this, I don't know, this amazing joy and just like glee is the only word that fits, that I feel, because these 4 books are out, that I always had, this having a dream and having a vision and having it come to fruition, especially when it feels so distant for most of your life, is just lovely. So just having these four out in the world, and this might sound immodest, but I set out to do a certain thing. I set out to do a certain thing with these four books, and I feel and the feeling of that actually having happened, it sometimes takes me by surprise. And so I think the fact that these characters became so real and so vivid and so whole to me, so it's been this whole year almost for me, and certainly this month and this week has been almost this grieving process of letting them go, now that they're out in the world, and I've moved on to write other stories. But this whole thing of giving this world up and giving it over and not having to dream them every night and kind of live with them every day, it's actually a grieving process. And so I think that thing, how vivid and how whole and how just what I needed in my life they became, was that's the magic. And I mean, that's the magic I think every writer will talk about. How does that story actually happen? And we can talk about process until the cows come home, but when you sit down and that magic pours out, and some authors like to say, these characters in my head and they just don't stop talking. And I don't always think of it that way, but there is just something real about, you're literally living with these people. I don't even think of them as characters, they're people. And to have these people have become these people who are in these books, I mean, that's incredible magic.
Well, I will say one of the reasons why I think Austen endures all this time is that her characters are so real to people and they endure and you get attached to them. And I feel that same way about the Rajes. Like, I feel like I could be friends with them or like just emulate them, or, put posters of their Yash's campaign on my wall and stuff, put stickers on my car for him. I'll get my yard sign. They're very relatable, and that's something that that is a huge parallel with like the work that you've done to modernize, adapt, homage. I really feel a strong connection to the characters. You've built very vivid people, like you said, not just characters but people. So I love that.
Yeah, that's the best thing anyone could say to me, and thank you.
Oh. Well, it's easy to tell the truth. What has been the least pleasant surprise in all of this? What's been annoying?
Oh my gosh, I'm in such a positive place about this. I guess that
Curious.
Getting it out, to people is always a challenge. Just by it's always that end of it, the business end of it, that is always the challenge. It is always where all the pain lies, and not in the characters and the books and the storytelling itself.
Yeah.
And so, but it's been delightful. I think the reactions have been delightful every single time a reader comes and says something to me. It's just been great. That's what I'm saying, that's the magic. If you had talked to me when I was in the throes of it, when I was actually wanting to stab my eyes out, and my family, was rolling its eyes, and my friends were having to deal with my whole, I don't believe I've ever written a book because I don't know how to do this. If you caught me at that time, which also is very much part of the process and happens every single time, you think, why did I think I can write again? So at that time, yes, but in retrospect, I think, it's all just, it has to happen that way. It has to happen that way. And so, yeah, I don't think that I could, the state I'm in right now, grieving as I am, letting the series go out into the world, I couldn't think of a single negative thing.
Good. That's good. This is for me, always a difficult question to answer, but do you have a favorite Jane Austen novel?
Every single time I'm in an interview, this question is asked, and every single time I say no. Well, I have 4 favorites.
Okay. And that's what
And,
got adapted.
yeah.
Okay. And I feel like it's like, to me, it's always like, it depends on what I'm looking for in
Uh,
things.
I think that they are, one of the really interesting things for me about them is that there's something in each one, and which is probably why this happens with readers, that you're able to, where you are in your life, you're able to find exactly what you need. I mean, they're like the universe; it gives you what you want. But I feel like Pride and Prejudice is probably her most, I don't know how to say this. I don't want to say complete work, because that makes it sound like the others are incomplete, but it is the most complex and whole and fully tied together work. It's the plot, the characters, the conflict, it all comes together really beautifully. It's also, in terms of endurance, it is, it's you said that, all of us have an opinion about why Austen endures, and my understanding, the real, why I think she endures is the fact of anyone, and she was writing contemporary novels. Like, this is the thing that is the most important to remember, is that we read so much historical fiction today. She wasn't writing historical; she was commenting on her world, and that almost like acerbic, absolutely honest, being able to ridicule the world she lives in without ever really breaking its rules. So staying within the lines and yet seeing very clearly what is wrong is kind of what I think all of us are trying to do even today. But the reason that I think she endures is that at a time when women had no reason to believe in their self-worth, to believe they could want things and get them, that was not something we were seeing we were not seeing that in literature, for sure. We were not seeing that in our stories. We were not seeing that in our world until, I mean, I think even my grandmother's and my mother's generation, you were always being taught that you put your head down and take what the world gives you, and that's the way that you will find happiness. But she had a heroine back then who had, whose choice was marriage and destitution, and the eighth richest man in England, by someone actually did that study, and Darcy was supposed to be the eighth richest man in England, which probably made him like the eighth richest man in the world, offers for her. And because she believes that he is unworthy and that she believes he's a jerk, she says, no, I deserve better. And so to see that, I think we still struggle today with being able to do that. Right. If our choice is between destitution and the eighth richest man in the world, how many of us are going to say, I deserve better, and so that is the real reason to be able to write a story that so deeply. So I think she believed in the self-worth of women so deeply that it is still a struggle we're struggling with. And that's what we see in there. And it's it's your whole journey being put right in front of your face, right? And so that's kind of the gold. And I have completely forgotten your question.
That's okay. So it was just, what's your favorite? But this actually flows right into my next two questions, which were, I wanted to know, you and I had before we went live, we're talking about how neither of us are scholars when it comes to Jane Austen. We're just like consumers and avid lovers,
Yes.
But have you read much about her, like bios, lit crit, other spin-offs, and do you have any favorites? Because I do have a favorite, which is, and you were sort of speaking to the themes of it, Jane Austen, The Secret Radical.
Okay.
Which in that the author really talks about how she was doing things in her contemporary work that was extremely, like, it was low key, but it was really like, wow, that's really pushing envelopes, to have a female who turned down marriage, especially to such a wealthy person, to criticize the class system, by the way that Elizabeth speaks to Lady Catherine, to ridicule. How many clergy did she ridicule in her novels, right? She didn't make them the venerated one. She made them the object of scorn, right? So between all that, that's one, I think, the reasons why it can work so well, that what you've done with the modernization, because she's tapping on themes that we're still struggling with today, especially when it comes to women's rights and equality. And that's why it's so adaptable for a modern retelling like you've done. So are there any particular ones that you've read and love of spin-offs or bios or
So,
Jane
so when
Austen
I
as an
say, yeah, when I say I'm not a scholar, I truly, in fact, one of the things, again, you mentioned at the start, one of the common questions that people will often ask you is, if you could have coffee with a dead author, who it would be. And I have other authors too, but I would really love to meet Jane Austen, and you called her your dead best friend, and I might be misquoting that, but I think that I feel like she is buried under so much interpretation because of this scholar, this huge scholar culture almost surrounding her work, is that she's buried. And I was able to visit in 2019, just before we all got locked up, her home, or one of her homes in Chawton, and reading her letters there and just seeing that presence and that world, I feel like we've buried her under. Like, I have talked to scholars where I'll say, this is what I felt when I read this, and there are scholars who will say, no, but if you read the fifth page and the seventh line in her letter to her brother Edward, you'll see that couldn't possibly be what she meant, because this is what she said. And it is, I mean, truly, it's hilarious, and I could ridicule it. Like they've become the clergy she ridiculed. And so it's it's really, just, who was she really? I think she was probably just, a woman trying to tell a story and say things, which is what all of us who write do. And so that whole, it almost, I have kind of almost avoided getting into that level of analysis and interpretation, because it takes away from me from the joy of my connection, right, with her work. But having said that, I think my favorite retelling is Bridget Jones' Diary. And it is, again, because, and the parallel is weird, because when I first read her as a young person, I was like, oh my God, this is me. How Lizzie Bennet is behaving is how who I want to be, And so when I read Bridget Jones, on the other hand, it was the first time my neurosis about being a woman. I remember one of my friends, a guy, saying, do women really measure their thighs? And just the fact that you need to ask that is, I want to make you, I want to box your ears because you privileged little, to it. Yes, women do a lot of that. I mean, it was so here's a heroine who is measuring her thighs and obsessing over, the size of them, and just the neurosis of being a woman in the spotlight of the world was something that Bridget Jones, I think, captured so well. So that was the thing, right? That is the spirit of a storyteller, and a spirit of, storytelling, rather than I want to recreate Bennett. I want to recreate Lizzie Bennet, and I want to recreate Mr. Darcy.
Yeah,
it was
more just take the spirit of them and
yes.
and see how that can, like, the spirit of it
Yeah.
can manifest. I love that. So Bridget Jones is how I got into Jane Austen, because there was never a protagonist with the name Bridget in anything, right? I couldn't find my name on any of the tourist schlock, whatever, except the time that my mom went to Scotland in the 80s. She brought back a thing with Bridget on it. Otherwise, just there were no Bridgets out there. So when there was a protagonist with that first name, and I was in Dublin in 2000, and I bought Bridget Jones' Diary, I read it on the way back, and I just fell in love with that. And then that made me want to watch Pride and Prejudice, because she references the adaptation with Jennifer Ehle and Colin Firth, yes, who was Mr. Darcy. and who inspired the character of Mark Darcy, and then later played the character of Mark Darcy, which was inspired by his portrayal of Mr. Darcy. So it was like super extra.
Oh, just so nuts. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Bridget Jones is how I got into it too, and I ended up reading Pride and Prejudice when in a moment when I was in like some of, you know, I had a job that I loved, but I ended up not getting along with the one person who was responsible for letting me stay in the job. And so I had to leave, and it was such a dark time. And that's when I read, I really felt like it like saved me, you know, kind of thing. But this goes really well, segues really well into the next section of what I wanted to talk about, which was modern issues that were also kind of addressed in Austen. You know, and you have a family of first, second generation Indian Americans, and they're living in California, so they're good. So that's going to come up naturally. But the thing is, all of those issues that are in the four novels, they also are hinted at, or we can, I feel sometimes maybe project, but also, you know, one of the things that Austen does so well is she's a forensic psychological profiler practically when it comes to our characters. And that close study of humans that she infused into the characters is, I think, why they endure so well today, and why we can take from them some modern projections, if you will. So the first one is, it's almost Pride Month, you can't see my card, LGBTQ, which I love. I love what you did with this. And I just wanted to bring up how, if anyone who hasn't read them, that there are some really clever ways. Like, how did you conceive? How did you come up with Brandy Hennessy? That was just hilarious. As soon as I saw the name, as soon as I heard the name, I was just like, oh, I know who this is gonna be.
So this is, you're talking about in Sense and Sensibility, which I will say is in terms of translating conceptually, probably it translates least well across time of her novels. And that's why I think the spotlight gets put on the sister relationship, right? And but the core conflict of that novel is, if you think of it as Edward and Eleanor, that conflict does not translate, because we no longer live in a world, you know, where getting out of a relationship is taboo or getting out of a relationship is hard. I like to joke that, you know, if your spouse or your partner sneezes in a way that you don't like, you walk away from them. Nobody will judge you. That's, you know, the world we live in. And, you know, I'm all for that. But the core conflict of Sense and Sensibility is this, you know, is this man who is unable to get out of an engagement that he got into young and stupid, simply because that will make him lose his self-worth, who he believes he is, who the world believes he is, right? That absolutely, just in terms of a paradigm, no longer makes sense. So that was an interesting thing too, and I'll talk about that some more, but I'll come back to the question that you had asked, which was, oh my gosh, I'm having a senior moment. Repeat it.
LGBTQ.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Brandy Hennessy was, I have to give credit to my friend Sally Kilpatrick, who writes the most hilarious Southern fiction, just really a very talented writer. And when I was writing this, she said, you know, and I was telling her about the Marianne story, the Marianne subplot, what was going to happen, and she's like, there better be there better be a Colonel Brandy in there. And so I was like, oh my gosh, you know, Brandy. And then one of my daughter's best friends is her last name is Hennessy, and I was like, of course, if there's a Colonel Brandy, it's going to be Brandy Hennessy. And so, you know, that's kind of where that came from. But I knew when I was writing Recipe for Persuasion, and China was in there, I knew that song was, was her Willoughby. So I knew that even as I was writing it, because again, Willoughby in Another Time, of course he does some fundamentally awful things, but there's also so much of what the what the world is expecting of him. So it's also a flaw in society as much as it is, that's creating so there's this whole, and often with her characters that's happening, right? I mean, whether it is Mr. Collins, whether it is Wickham, whether it is, yes, they are of weaker character, but that weakness might manifest completely different today. At that time, it was they were just trying to fit in. They were trying to be what their world deemed noble and deemed right. And so Willoughby it's really actually really sad, the life that he gets stuck with. And I think Jane Austen acknowledges that even in the book. But a certain kind of nobility and a certain kind of choice making is required of you across her books. And so how does that's really natural to me how that translates into our world, because that has not changed. We're constantly fighting to fit in a certain way, even in this world that doesn't overtly demand fitting in, but yet under the surface demands it even more than ever, I think, with social media and what media is. It's we want to be that shiny thing, right, that is deemed success or deemed fantastical in our world. And I think that kind of that was the whole song storyline is coming from that place, where would this person rather a different world? Sure, but in her given world, these are the choices she feels she has to make.
Yeah, right. So that brings me to my next modern issue that was explored in Austen as well, which is bigotry, right? And in Austen, so often it's the bigotry of classism, because that's what she was dealing with on a regular basis. But what you've done is take it not just with classism, but also homophobia, religion, sexual orientation, racism, and classism continues in modern times too. And I was just thinking of how you have main characters who, like DJ Kane, who's mixed race, African and Indian, Rico Silva, who's mixed ethnicity, and who is quote unquote, you were to use the old term for it, bastard, right? So he's a hidden love child, yeah. which shows up in Austen as well with Eliza Williams, Colonel Brandon's charge, but also with Harriet Smith. Harriet Smith is like that in Emma.
Allegedly, yes.
Right. And you have, both Abdul and Omar from the two other books face
Islamophobia.
Yeah. So, and that's what kept Omar from Chile, and Abdul is othered in those news reports when he's finally getting better. And then, of course, Song Ji-woo rejects China, just like Willoughby rejects Marianne, and Willoughby does it for class reasons, and Song does it for because of LGBTQ hatred, which is, you dislike her for choosing money and fame and career over China, but you also understand that this is the world we live in. Just like you said with Willoughby, it's like you do have a modicum of.
Yeah.
So how did you conceive to take the issues from then and put them into modern times?
So some of it, of course, is just organic. Our world has not. We love to think, that in America we love to say that it's a classless society, and it's such a lie. Of course it's not. It's almost, and maybe that's the human condition, and maybe we are constantly. We're just built to want to be at the top of every ladder. That's why power is so important. That's why. So some of this. So I'll say, when I started, kind of the seed of this entire thing, and there's many seeds. This is a multi-seed crop, and so when I was at the first one with Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors, when this family was kind of forming inside me, one of the things that I actually set out to do first was the fact that that Darcy is such a definitive romantic hero of our time, right? If you ask someone who is the greatest romantic hero of our time, several people will answer Mr. Darcy, right? And I call him our bib hero. We all drool so much, we need a bib. And so and yet through the first half of the book, or through the beginning of the book, he's really a jerk, I mean, there's and we are completely willing to do the time it takes for him to figure his mistakes and grow and all of that. And yet when you're writing a female character, you're constantly coming up against this word likability, right? Likability. And so one of the main things in gender swapping that was, in 2017, can I write a woman who owns her privilege quite that much, who never apologizes for it, and who is not going to be brought to her knees and broken down for having that. She's not going to be shamed, but she is going to make the journey of realizing that her lens is wrong. She's missing empathy in her lens, and that's her growth. So I didn't want to break a woman down and have her apologize for her arrogance and for her, her brilliance, her just her general
her wealthy, her hands that are worth a lot.
Yes.
Do you know how much these hands are worth?
So all of that, and it's and they are worth a lot, and she does great things with them, but she is missing the lens of empathy, right? And she learns that, and
Right.
that is the story of Darcy, right? He's always he was raised, as she says, to do the right thing and all of that, but he's coming at it from a place of that lacks empathy. So his reasoning for why all those things were taught to him is not where it needs to be, and that's the journey. And so my first thing was to be able to do that, to see if to write that woman, because and of course on a personal level, just writing a female Darcy was like so eye-opening for me, but that's where it came from. So I actually made a list, because Mr. Darcy is literally at the top of, I mean, he's not titled per se. So he could have been the king or a prince, but other than that, all the privilege of his time he has. And so I actually made a list of the privileges of our time that give you a leg up. And from a genius level brain to generational wealth as opposed to just wealth, and all the and a family that believes in you, like all of those things that just everyone doesn't have, and as soon as you have it, you automatically have a leg up. So the thing she was not going to have, obviously, she's a woman, so she wasn't going to have that, and she wasn't going to be white. So in America, in the ladder of privilege, those are the two things she was not going to have. But other than that, I wanted to literally lay it on with this family, right? So that's kind of where this whole descended from royalty thing comes. That was kind of where this whole so that's how Trisha's development happened, where I was searching for what defines privilege in our time. And I feel like this entire series started out with wanting to explore what privilege means in our time, and what so much of people who have it denying it means. And because a lot of this whole differences, and this whole I am better than you, you are different than me, all of that comes from a place of that, right? It's a class is, I have privilege and you don't. That's essentially the class lines. And so a lot of it was coming from there. So I set out to to explore that. And so it was it was then organic to these characters and organic to these stories.
Well, one thing I noticed a lot was mentioned in almost, I think, all four novels is healthcare in the US and how screwed up it is, and how you are at the mercy of fundraisers, of a brilliant politician who can navigate and put in policy like the fictional Yash. And what I saw as a parallel to Austen, because she brings it up in almost all her novels, is genteel poverty. Because when it came to people of the gentlemanly class, right, you weren't allowed to work, so you were sort of stuck here. So stuck where you were not, you couldn't work for your money because then you were, going against your class. But you also couldn't get any money because you were at the mercy of Mr. John Dashwood if you are the Dashwood women, or the kindness of your neighbors if you're Miss Bates. And I feel like that's the same thing that's happening when it comes to healthcare in the novels that you adapted. That's the genteel poverty, if you will, of our time in
Yes.
America.
Yes, that and many things. Yes, and the ironic thing about how, this is why I say that she was pushing at the rules, but she was never really breaking them. So she was very much within within the grid of gentility, right? So everything she was exploring was within that lens. She never steps out of that and explores the perspective of the servants in the home or all of that. I mean, she barely mentions them. And so, yeah, sure, we have to keep in mind that all of that was happening within this already privileged class, right? So you're right. I mean, even the poverty that she is exploring is and I think to some extent I did get caught in that same trap a little bit. And it is and I have some readers who do point that out, where it is we're still talking about even the people who don't have privilege are people who have privilege. So that's a whole
and vice versa, right?
Yeah,
They these people who have their own business, and they're like in Sense and Sensibility, they have their own business, they do businesses, but they're still, because of the way the healthcare system is set up, they're still at the mercy of
yeah,
medical bills. And so, the Bateses have a servant, Miss Bates and
but
Mrs.
still,
Bates, but they're still poor. Is something up, Mina?
I just wanted to go to some audience questions. If you guys want to wrap up this part of the conversation.
Oh,
I'm
one other
super
thing I
awkward.
wanted
Sorry
to,
about this.
it's okay.
because
One other thing I did want to address was the thing that I noticed the most as far as parallels is childhood trauma or young adult trauma, and how it plays a major part in the plots of Jane Austen's work, and it plays a major part in the plots of these four novels. So I think from and even the types of losing of parents, um, the what is essentially trigger a warning of rape, basically, of Yash by Julia Wickham, and how Wickham himself was like kind of the original one was like an evophile in the way he took advantage of young women and stuff, and how also that there are a lot of orphans and half orphans in both your novels and Jane Austen. So I just wanted to see if you thought about that deliberately.
so I do believe that that every story that anyone has ever told is in simplest terms a character in crisis, who finds a way for that crisis to be okay, right? So we are essentially digging into characters who don't feel okay, right? There is no story. If you're telling a story of me and you ask me what is the darkest moment in writing these books, and I'm like, there's no dark moment, so there's no story, right? I mean, if you the story is for when a person feels lost or uncomfortable or traumatized in their skin. And so trauma, the deepest trauma is the earliest trauma. So childhood's in all of our stories, right? I mean, what are we dealing with day to day? If you're repeating patterns, you're doing whatever you're doing, you can find the roots are always in childhood. So of course that is just, again, it's just part of being human. That's where all pain can be traced. And so Austen was doing it. Every other author does that, because that's what we're doing. We're tracing our pain back so that we can open it up kind of access it, right?
Mhm.
So in those terms, I think that that absolutely that's what. But also, I think one way to tell stories, and her stories are are human against world, right? When you do that, human against human, human against whatever, they're you within society, right? And all of the conflicts come from the rules of society and the structure of society. That's every one of her conflicts are not so much in human beings being bad, but in, which is why we call them social commentary, right? Because she was saying this within society is broken. And so to some extent, that's what I was trying to explore with these, even with coming up with this politician. It's we're living in this world where truth has become has become what how do you define truth, which is like the most ridiculous thing, but which is absolutely true, right? So what is truth in politics, and what happens when a politician says I want to be truthful, right? There is, and we've all become so ideology based in our following of politics. It doesn't matter which side you're on, we all know that the people that we're voting for are doing something wrong, but because the end is what we want it to be, we look away, we look the other way, across the aisle, everywhere, right? So I wanted to kind of get into that again is a social thing. So here is a man who who dares to say I want to tell the truth, and yet he's telling so many lies about himself, and he's doing them because he believes that there is a greater truth connected to it. So in all of in all of it, there's in Persuasion, I think one of the parallels to what I learned from Jane Austen's Persuasion. For me, that story is, of course, it's the most romantic story, and I could read that letter a million times over, that Wentworth writes. But really, to me, what that story was about when I read it young is I was raised in this culture where there is this one and done thing, right? So a mistake is absolute. So when we were raised, you don't get the right grades, you don't get into the right college, your life is ruined. You hang out with the wrong crowd, your name, your reputation is gone, your life is ruined. You don't marry the right person at the right time, your life is ruined. So this whole like mistakes are absolute. And yet Persuasion was a story that taught me that you can make a mistake that causes great loss young, because you're influenced by the world, by whatever, right? You can make a mistake, but if you do the work of growing past the person who made that mistake, then you will have a second chance, right?
Wow, that's great. And that happens in all of them, if you think
Yeah.
about it, because Elizabeth makes the mistake of turning Darcy down. Emma makes the mistake of, whatever. There's a million mistakes that Emma makes, right?
Yeah.
And so that's great. One more thing I want to do before we go into the other questions. We could do this with every single book that you have, but let's just do it with Emma. From what I've seen so far, it's like a game. Like, where is the parallel game? So this is what I caught. Okay. Nina's mother, Chandana Kohli, is Miss Bates, right? She's got that like stream of this isn't exactly, I'm not saying this isn't exact.
But I love that you thought that, because the scene, and scene wise, again, they're not scene by scene, but the scene in which he calls her out, Vansh calls her out for her behavior, is very much that. Because what Emma's saying is to Mrs. Bates is not wrong. Everybody says this, but Knightley says, yes, everyone sees it, but there's a reason why they don't say it. And that was like the exact parallel when Anna tells her.
And the way she just twitters like that, that's so great. So again, not exact parallel, but I felt the ethos of Mr. Elton was very much Jiggy, kind of like slimy, the big man coming, like got a chip on his shoulder, and very mercenary.
Of course, and when the other side of that is Harry, right? Is Harry is Harriet, and
yes,
so
that's my
there's
body Harriet. Yeah, and that's what I have thought about as I went through the book. Is I felt like you asked yourself the question, what if? So we say, what if Harriet were actually a genius, but she just had no street smart whatsoever? That's Hattie. what if Darcy were the poor one and Elizabeth came from the wealthy family and was the arrogant one? And that's what I love about all the ways that you took elements of the story, put them into modern ways, but you said, what if? What if instead of money being the issue with Willoughby, it was homophobia was the issue with Willoughby. So those sort of things.
So I love that you're burying me under interpretation the way we bury Austen under interpretation. No, I love when when readers of course it's such an honor to have you think this through, but I'll tell you how the overt and subconsciously there's a lot going on, but my overt thing actually is, so when you think of Emma, when anyone thinks of Emma is, they think matchmaking automatically, right? They think, what is Emma about? It's about this woman matchmaking. To me, that's not what Emma is about. To me, Emma is about a woman who has everything, a woman who has immense privilege. I know I've used that word a lot, but it's a have, believing that she knows better because she has more. Right? So we live in this world, and we literally live in a world where billionaires are giving away their billions, but it comes with strings, right? And we do live in a world where just because I'm more successful and I have more wealth, that I believe how to fix your problems. I believe what will make your life better. So Emma literally meets Harriet, who is a woman who has much less than Emma has, and she is in love with someone. And Emma says, no, 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 that's not the person for you. This is the person for you, because in the world, in the life I imagine for you, which I believe is better for you because I have more, I'm allowed to do that, this man fits better. So she's literally matchmaking for a woman who's already found her match. And so to me it is really an exploration of charity, and why when we have more we believe we know more. And what does that mean? And Vansh's character and Nana's character and that whole thing. So the Emma project is really about that to me. Yeah. It's about this world we live in when we're trying to fix other people's problems. What does that say about us and what we believe, our worth is because of what we have?
Yeah. And that's the other thing I like that you did as well, which was, you doubled up characters in order to fit them in. So Naina's, she's Lucy Steele in Sense and Sensibility. So then I put the question is, what if Lucy Steele were actually do our empathy, and then she becomes Knightley, right? So that's an interesting way to go to to see it. What's the other side of the story? Maybe the other side of the story is this other character's story too. So what are some of the questions out there, Nina, that we've got?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Bridget and Sonali. That was an amazing conversation. I'm completely floored. I thought I knew Jane Austen pretty well, but I don't.
None of us do. She's buried under interpretation.
I'll never be an aficionado like you guys. You are.
So we'll never know.
Okay, so this one's an interesting one for me. There's that, and I've seen you talk about this before, Sonali, about the tremendous ties between food and sexual attraction or sensuality. And what is your motive around that, writing that that thing?
I think it has more to have, emotional connection and the need to take care of someone as being related to sensuality and sexuality. And food is such a great device to show caring and to show someone taking care of someone's basic sustenance, taking care of someone's pleasure. Food has that power, and sex has that power, and so there is definitely that parallel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't mean exactly using food in the act, although that's a whole different. But they are very parallel in terms of action, of communication between two characters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think when you do when you have very richly developed worlds like Jane Austen's, where the Raje family is, how it can capture your imagination so well, like shows like Sex and the City or Mad Men, when it comes to things like certain things become characters that aren't human. So in your work, Sonali, it's like the food and also the clothes, because you'll talk about how the chandana was what, like, dazzled the lilac one, right? Is that how I said? Did I say it the right way? I don't know.
You're talking about Chandni Kohli, Nana's mom, right?
No, I was thinking about, there was the two times when, like, what someone was wearing
Yes.
awed somebody else to the point where they were like, oh, and that happens in Austen too, right? She'll, like, the muslin gowns of Regency sort of thing. And it just helps create the world, I think, that you're looking in to have all that, like,
and it has that whole you looking at the world looking at you relationship that I think Austen does a lot of exploring of, is, so being judged by your clothes is one piece of that, right? One of my favorite lines is when Mrs. Bennet says, I knew you couldn't be this beautiful for nothing, right? And I paraphrase. And so, it's like so for a woman, her beauty is actually currency. It's her skill set, and it couldn't be wasted. But I think with this, absolutely, for Chandni Kohli and clothes, it specifically was a way to show crushed dreams, for one, and to show expression wherever one can find it. So if you've been crushed that much, you'll still find a way to express yourself, right? So this is a woman, and I think that's a nuance in her, where she finds a way. She has no ways. She's a woman whose choices have all been taken away from her because she's so scared, and yet she has these little outlets through which she finds a way to show love, to be, to be a person, a whole person, and clothing is one of those things. So just like food, there is great power in that, right?
And the other is homes, people's homes,
Yes.
and how they are a reflection of the character,
Yes.
right? So Pemberley, when Elizabeth sees Pemberley, she understands Darcy better, and it's not that she's like, wow, this house is amazing. It's like,
She is like that too.
It's part that, right? But she also said, this is the man who takes care of things and shows, like, his conscientiousness through how well everything is set up. And the little hints of that, with, like, the way that Vansh liked Nina's cushions that she had to put away because her mom had put the cushion, the bland color cushions on there, that shows, like, a connection between them when it comes to home decor, and how the big houses are like, Sri, I can't remember, sorry, what is the one in India, the name of the palace in India?
The Shripur Palace is the Sagar.
Yeah, and I thought of that as Pemberley, and I thought of the Anchorage as Longbourn. Right?
Okay,
so it's too grand, but it's not as, like, fancy, right? As a palace like Pemberley.
Yeah, but I mean, Anchorage is very much Pemberley also.
Okay.
It's very much but they're both, so it's Pemberley of now, and why Pemberley is a big deal today is because of all of this history, right? And I think, like, they're very much part of the same thing. And that's where I think that generational wealth thing happens, right? Where one thing comes from another thing. And that's where there's actually rooms in the Anchorage that are decorated to to mimic the Sagar Mahal. And so there's that whole generational wealth thing going on there, I think.
And we didn't even get to talk about Isha and Siddhartha too much, but how her room and the whiteness of it to keep her calm and everything, all of that is a big reflection of her personality, and it makes it its own character almost, her room, and how everyone talks about it. In every novel, it shows up in every novel. Was there another question in there?
A lot of them.
So Smitha says that she's loving this conversation. It's very interesting perspectives. Rupali asked the question that I'm really interested in too, because it sounds like she's Indian, I'm Indian, you're Indian. And it's basically, why did you choose to go with an Indian or Indian American family for your Austen book series when you could have more easily have picked an American or Caucasian family to tell your stories for this special tribute to her family, to the books?
So first, hi Rupali. This is my best friend from India who is up in the middle of the night attending this because she always finds how stuff happens in the evening, and that's the middle of really the middle of the night for her. So, so she probably knows the answer, but she asked it anyway. So I don't think that's true. I don't think that this particular story could have been told as a Caucasian story, because all of the for one, the basis of this series, I think, is the act of creating home, right? So to me, even picking an election, so when you and I'm a I'm a I always get confused about the first generation, second generation thing, but I'm basically an immigrant. I was grown in India. I was born in India. I grew up there. Came here as a young adult, or as a young person, and the act of making a new home. I think the last step in that, one of the last steps in that journey, is reaching for political power, right? When you want to become part of the decision making process for that place, that you're truly saying, this is now my home, this is where I belong, because I want to make decisions. And that's kind of why I think the soul of this entire series, or the track that it follows, is this oldest son running for, so the first book is when his candidacy is announced, and the last book happens in the aftermath of whatever happens to his election. And so so it is the journey of this family that was very firmly rooted somewhere else, uprooting itself and then becoming off this land. So I think it reflects on all the conflicts. I think it runs through every character's motivations. So it's very, very intrinsically, I think, a new homeowner story. So it's a new immigrant story. So just organically, I think that it is an Indian American story, and it couldn't just switch to being a Caucasian story. It could switch to being another immigrant story maybe, but then the details would change.
I was actually going to say that to me, it feels like it could only be an Indian American story because, the white Caucasian takes have already they've been done by people who have that history, whereas you have this incredible perspective that only could be done, I think, do this in this way and makes it so unique and interesting.
Yeah, and the conflicts are intrinsically, I think, immigrant conflicts, a lot of them.
Right. Almost everybody wants to know if you're going to continue writing these stories. I know that you said that this is it, but are you going to be using any of your minor characters? Are you going to do any other particular Austen books like Mansfield Park?
No, see, these were my 4 favorites, and I was always going to just do these. I do have a short story, Nisha and Neil's story, for those of you familiar with the family. That's the second daughter. And it came out once in an anthology, and it was in print only for a little while, but it comes back out this year as part of another anthology called The Smart Asses. So it's called The Runaway Bride. So it will be available on all platforms later this year. So that's the only thing that really is, that's the only story that really remains to be told.
I don't know. I feel like you've got a Buildings Roman young adult novel in you with Mishka and her mystery writing. I saw Northanger Abbey in that so much, and I thought that would be the best young adult novel if you took her and took Northanger Abbey and did one more.
I'll tell you what, like, if this becomes, a thing where 10 years later people still remember, then maybe I'll come back and revisit with Mishka. By that time, it'll be legal.
That's right. They are love stories.
The way she was at the dance and her uncle tried to get her to dance with the person, which is just like what happened to Catherine Morland, and how she's into writing mysteries. I think she's got a mock Gothic young adult novel in her coming out.
There you go. It's yeah, maybe that was Austen holding my hand, from yeah, maybe we'll see.
So, Karen wants to know, how was Trisha surprised that DJ didn't want to look like he was breaking into an expensive car because it was California?
Uh, so that this is really, I think, about the blind spots that we all have, and so I don't think she's so much surprised about that particular thing as she is punched in the face with the parts about the world we live in she's been ignoring because of her privilege. And so that kind of is where I was coming from with that. It's look away now. There's so much you've been looking away from, but can you look away now?
Mm-hmm.
That thing was, I think, what that
Yeah,
was.
Yeah,
how
like a
far can you
little bit
push
of
it?
that Darcy arrogance that you were talking about, where she doesn't see what's right in front of her face.
Mhm. Well, Karen also says that you should make a list of the music and art you refer to in the novels because she'd love to hear and see it. And Karen, a different Karen says, this was great. I learned a lot and you made me think. I'm going to just ask one more question from Sally, which is a two-part question. How thoroughly did you conceive the characters throughout the series before you started? Did you know what each character's challenges would be from the beginning?
So that's a great question. I had I had back in 2013 when I first sold my first book, and I had like the next four kind of laid out, which is my first, the Bollywood books. Back then, December of 2013, I was sitting in, in the lobby in the waiting area of my children's math class while they were doing math, and I wrote down these one-page synopses for all four books. And the soul of those remained the same. So the details of them, as I worked on each book, of course, I really dug into, and so the characters grew from that. Those were the seeds, and they grew from there. But I did kind of know right from the beginning what the stories of the others were, almost to a point where there were times when my editor would be, I think we need to scale back on Ashna in this book until the next one comes, because her, the reader does not. And so I had to, when I was talking about Ashna in Pride, Prejudice and Other Flavors, I had to kind of turn that back. So yeah, I didn't know, so I knew her story fully well when I was writing that. I knew Isha's story, I knew, which is like the true magic, right? We were talking about the magic. I think I knew, and I knew, of course, that Sid was going to be, as soon as I knew India and I knew that she had this brother, it was like I knew that piece. But how that whole thing, somewhere inside, way back in my subconscious, I knew there was something where this whole Isha thing had happened. But until that, I mean, when it showed up on the page, it was this moment of complete surprise delight. Oh my gosh. So this is what happened. So I knew and I didn't know.
That's awesome. And so would you have described Isha as just like an extreme empath? That's what happened to her after her accident, is that she became an extreme empath?
I think she crossed some dimension, right, where all the information lies. And that's the only way. And that really also just, as I say that makes more sense. I mean, I think there's a lot in the world that's unexplained, right? There's so much that I believe that we see and process one little bit of what is happening in the universe. And I think Isha's story is a little bit of that, is that just this thing, her mother's love, whatever, maybe it's a nod to Harry and Lily Potter. I don't know what and where, but I think that something crosses over. But I do remember where Isha's story comes from is a very specific thing. I remember this news report way back, when I was still in India. I was still in school, I think. And I remember seeing this news report of this little girl who was having visions. And the thing that I remember being terribly disturbed by was this endless line of people outside her door. So here was this little girl who was probably in great trauma, right? Because she didn't know what was happening to her, or I don't know what was happening with her, but that's how I saw it. And all this line of people was interested in was getting her to help them, and getting her to take their pain away. And so that kind of was, what happens again with privilege. They're literally able to pick her up and remove her from that situation. But this girl was not from that sort of thing, and so here she was with all this noise beating down on her. And so I think, you end up tucking away all these little pieces somewhere, and then as the story happens, they slip out one by one.
Mhm.
And so when all of them are gone, I'll stop writing.
That'll be when you're dead, I hope. Well, I don't hope you die, but I hope that.
But I agree, yes. Until the day I die, yes.
Okay, that's good. I kind of lied. Rupali has one more question about this is, I think, sort of important. Are there other social or women's issues you'll be thinking about for your next books, given the current world we're living in? And I feel like all of your books have addressed some really important issues. So, like, I can't imagine you not continuing to write about all kinds of issues.
Yeah, she just wants me to talk about my next book.
Yeah, she's like, are
That's a
we
good
asking
friend.
too soon? Are we
That's a
giving
good
it
friend.
away?
Like wink, wink. Yes, I think that always something, until, and even when I'm writing, sometimes a plot and a character shows up. And until I have figured out what I am trying to poke at and what I'm trying to say, the writing process is torture for me, right? I'm like trying to force the words and coming up with situations, but I'm like, what am I trying to say? And until I figure that out, and some stories are just magic, right? From the beginning, I know what I'm trying to say. And then that just makes it that much easier. But sometimes it is just like, it's there, like Isha sitting in the back of my head, it's there, I just don't know what it is. So one of the things that I have always that bothers me, that I feel like has not seen enough light of day is older Indian American women or older Indian women, and often I think older women of all sorts, they are turned into, there somehow our sexuality is supposed to erase in a second when we cross over a certain age. And it absolutely in reality does not happen, right? I mean, it is, we continue to be bisexual beings who want to feel and be attractive and all of that. And so I think the next one, so the next story, I'll quickly say this, that it comes out in November, and it's a women's fiction novel. And it is the story of 3 generations of Indian American women on the dating scene together. So it's this hot 65-year-old grandmother, a 47-year-old divorced mom, and a 25-year-old tech genius who's trying to work on a dating app, having never dated. And so these 3 women are going to research existing dating apps and kind of find a way to live their most authentic lives.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. I love that so much because this is personal, but I'm back to being single again, and I'm on the dating apps, and I'm thinking about Nine and how her relationship with Vansh, and how he's 12 years younger. And I'm like, I don't necessarily have to swipe left just because they're 12 years younger than me. If this character can do it, maybe I can too.
Yeah. Well, do it, Bridget.
Okay.
Oh, you guys are hilarious. So I just want to say thank you for being here. Bridget, you really brought it. Sonali, you are, as Deborah says, insightful and smart, and I just adore you. So I appreciate you being here and taking the time to talk to us. And I love your books, and I hope that everybody out there is reading them. Something I forgot to say earlier was that you can buy signed books from Sonali from Bank Square Books for this program. I put the link in the chat a couple of times, and I will do it as in the recap as well. But I appreciate the libraries that partnered with us on this, and Mass Bay, and I think it's been really lovely. So thank you both for being here and making this conversation so unique and special.
Yeah, and Meena, always, as always, thank you for everything you're doing, to bring romance
Super
novels,
librarian.
yeah, into the spotlight in this, intelligent and smart and heartfelt way. And the work you do is priceless. So thank you so much. And Bridget, this was amazing. I want to, I want, I want to see what was on the rest of
Oh yeah,
those.
because we didn't get to the other parallels from the 3 other novels,
There's
but
a whole nother stack to go. We're gonna have to
should
do
do
like
that.
a
Yeah, we should do that on my Facebook group, just what's left over. And I'm going to say thank you to everyone who has tuned in, everyone who will watch this later. My friend Smita's here too. So hi, Smita. So yeah, this is, an ask for a Saturday, lazy Saturday afternoon. So thank you for being here. Thank you, both of you, for, doing this so thoughtfully. Thank you.
absolutely.
Thanks,
Yes, you should do a take two at some point. So goodbye, everybody. Have a
Super
wonderful
fun.
day.
Bye-bye.